You know, my friend's band recorded this music, this theme song.
I did not.
Yeah, it's true. Haystack Rock, local Portland band, theme music for the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I am Bill Oram, joined by Brenna Green from Coin 6, Channel 6. Brenna, how are you?
I'm good. Just, getting a second to breathe. How are you?
Similar. You have certainly been going. We all have. I mean, busy spring. The most recent thing that we've been dealing with, you and I were both at Blazers exit interviews on Monday. For those who don't know, kind of some of the inner workings of the NBA. Once the season ends, teams bring their players in and they sit down with each player and they do what's called an exit interview, where they say, hey, we want you to work on your jumper in the off season. We want you to shed some weight. We want you to get stronger. And then the players come out of those meetings. They come sit in a little room with us and we ask them all the questions that you really, really want to know. And that was on Monday. Brenna, you and I were there. I came out of there with some questions that I wrote in the Oregonian. I am wondering if you came out of there with any pressing questions for the Portland Trail Blazers 21 and 61 this year as they enter this offseason.
There is no doubt in my mind that the best thing for the Trailblazers is for them to not play well next year. And for the overall team, that is in their best interest for the organization, is to not field a good team next year. The domino effects of that are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch, because that is another year of this is going to cause some chaos, I think. So, yeah, I'm very interested to see. My biggest question is just, what exactly does tanking for another year mean for the people associated with this organization?
So the three questions I wrote down and had in my column on Monday evening, Tuesday morning, are all kind of on that same theme, because I agree with you. You know, you are in a full reset and you are in talent acquisition mode. You do not have the surefire front-facing star of the future yet. You know, you might. You know, Shaedon Sharpe might be that guy. Scoot Henderson might still be that guy. They are young. We don't know. But obviously none of them are, you know, a Victor Wembanyama. No, nobody is. But like a player that you are ready to rock with. And so, you know, how do you acquire talent? Is through the draft. And so the three questions I had, and we can kind of riff on these, I think, were how bad are they willing to be next year? And really, do they have the stomach to be as bad as they should? Because another 21 and 61 season, you know, puts you kind of in the mix for the top of that really good draft. There's some really good players in that draft. You know, Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, and no, there's no guarantee you get those players, but you are right now a young team. It's imperative that you stay young and play like a young team so that you can get players on the timeline of your players of tomorrow who, you know, help you get over the hump in 5 years or whatever it is. So how bad are they willing to be? And are they on the same page with Chauncey Billups? I mean, Brenna, you were there. When you listen to Chauncey Billups talk about what needs to happen, and then you listen to Joe Cronin, the GM, talk about development, you know, being in development mode, not skipping steps, the fact that they're not going to be ready to win in a big way until, you know, their young players, meaning Shaedon and Scoot and, you know, a handful of the other young guys are really ready to compete. You know, those don't sound like the same thing. So is there an actual schism between the two, or is that just standard coaches coach to win? Chauncey Billups is an ultra competitive guy, and so the way he says it is going to sound different than the front office. Or do you which one is it? Is it really a divide, or is it just messaging?
I think it's I think it's a divide, but I think it's a divide not for the reasons that would necessarily jump out to somebody who wasn't in the know of everything that is on the line next year. Chauncey wants to play well next year because Chauncey wants to keep his job. And you can say what you want about how things have gone the first 3 years. There's a lot of situations that were completely out of his control that led to this rebuild. But he might be a casualty of it. In fact, I would be surprised if he wasn't a casualty of it if it ends up being the same situation next year. And, I think we can all agree that Chauncey has been great to work with and, is a stand-up individual. But I guess just what do you do when you have this coach who came in who had completely, what a different situation he came into than the situation he's in now. It's night and day. And, if they have another tanking season, I would be surprised if he wasn't out. And like I said, I don't think that's really his fault. But, when you have 3 straight tanking seasons, I guess it would technically be 4, right? If you count the year where they kind of gave it all up at the end.
Yep.
Then it becomes a situation of messaging and needing fresh blood around there, probably, even though all the players love Chauncey. Like, I really do think, what I gleaned from those X interviews is that they do really like him. But yeah, So I think Chauncey wants to play well because Chauncey wants to keep his job.
Mm-hmm.
However, the organization as a whole does not want them to play well. Right. And that is going to be a really interesting push and pull to follow next year. Very interesting.
A coach can only, his team can only be as good as his players are. And so, Chauncey can, want to, be competing and win in a big way. But, the players they have are not ready. And if anything, they have too many players who are who make them almost too good. When Malcolm Brogdon was playing and they were in December, they were almost too good, right? He made them better than they should have been, even going into a weak draft. And so you're kind of in a weird in between with the roster construction right now. So before I get to that, I do want to touch on the Chauncey thing, because the question of, what do you do with Chauncey? Because he's done, I think, an okay job in terms of the development piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's been a good face of the team. I know fans, are ready to move on largely from what I hear. But it would be a weird time to hire a new coach because you don't yet know what you are. If you were going to hire a new coach, you'd hire somebody, like what the Thunder did with Mark Daigneault, and you'd hire like somebody who, is a development-minded coach, has maybe, come up through the coaching ranks and really understands, Chauncey was brought in to be a winner because that's what Chauncey has been in his career. He's been a winner who probably was really well suited to coach grown-ups. But what do you do with him now? He's got a year left on his contract. He's been a good soldier. And I think we touched on this last week, so I don't want to belabor it, but you're in a position where, why would he want to come into next season as a lame duck? But if you're the Blazers, you really haven't seen enough to extend him or to pick up that option for the following year. So, but Chauncey seems like he wants to come back, even though what he says doesn't seem to line up with the franchise's vision. Joe Cronin was unequivocal that Chauncey is still their guy for next year. So I think this will all come to a head at some point, unless the Blazers just really double down on Chauncey Billups as a coach and say, we believe in him, we're picking up that option, we're going to work with him on a contract extension. We hired him to coach a winning team, and we think we're on our way to becoming a winning team, but it's going to take some time. And I just really think that would not fly with the fan base, because I don't think Chauncey has really, Chauncey has won over his locker room, but for whatever reason, Chauncey has not won over the fan base. And I think it largely just has to do with the results. There's obviously going to be some who have, there's certainly issues, in his past, but, for the most part, I think, the on-court product and the results has made it easy for him to kind of be the scapegoat. Some is fair, some isn't. But speaking about the roster and maybe them being a little too good, Malcolm Brogdon is not a guy you should expect to be on the Blazers roster next year.
No.
Jeremy Grant is going into the second year of a 5-year contract, 30 years old. Really going to be interesting to see what they do with him.
I'm
He feels like a
fascinated with that.
mercenary. I just don't know what the market for him is going to be.
Yep.
But also, as he gets older and the contract theoretically gets more appealing, how appealing is he going to be as a player with multiple years left on that deal? So you're in sort of with all of your players who are under contract and your veteran players who aren't really part of your future, you are trying to find the sweet spot of when to make a move, when you can maximize their return in a way where they're going to have the highest value. So not trading Malcolm Brogdon at the trade deadline is potentially fine if you believe that come July, after the free agent market has dried up, then you can really like start going around to teams who, are missing a piece and Malcolm Brogdon is now available. Do they have more they're willing to give up? So, but thinking of that sliding scale of, when is the sweet spot to trade a guy brings me to maybe the Blazers' best player. Probably, yes, the Blazers' best player, Anthony Simons. And Anthony Simons is set to make, I think, $26 million each of the next 2 years. He's 24 years old. Blazers scoring leader, averages career high in points. He's entering the prime of his career. He's another guy who says he wants to win right now, but let's even put that aside because everybody wants to win, and not everybody gets to win. I think this is the summer that the Blazers need to get serious about trying to trade Anthony Simons for a variety of reasons. You've got the logjam at guard.
Yeah.
Ant is not only older than Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, he's on a totally different contract timeline, right? So he's got 2 years left on his deal. He'll be an unrestricted free agent in 2 years, where he could grow into a player who's making $45-50 million a year by then, and you're still going to have Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe, who, in theory, should be the faces of the team, should be your franchise players by then, in theory. And they're still going to be on rookie contracts. You're going to have Anthony Simons making, a whole lot of money, commanding a whole lot of shots. And, he's obviously a ball dominant player, not a defender. I think that when we're talking about a sweet spot, this feels like the sweet spot where there will be a market for Anthony Simons because he is 24. Because if you take on his contract, which is actually really attractive by today's standards, when the salary cap is going to be like $140 million, and you have him for 2 guaranteed years to, sell him on what you're doing and hopefully work out a long-term thing if he ends up being a fit. This feels like the moment that the Blazers really have to explore that. And if the market's not back, you don't feel bad, or isn't great, you don't feel bad about bringing him back. He's a wonderful player. And while you're losing, I don't mean to say he's a great guy to go put up empty numbers, but he's kind of a great guy to go put up empty numbers. But I think that you have to start getting serious about trading Anthony Simons. What do you think about that? And how do you think, Anthony Simons is a homegrown player. They drafted him. They found him at 18 years old and drafted him in the first round and developed him. And, he's, at least offensively, is an all-star caliber guard. How would fans react? I have a part B to that question. Would going all in on the young guys make it easier for fans to go all in on the young guys, right? Because when you have guys like Ant and Brogdon and Jeremy, you're kind of doing this balancing act of wait, those guys are good enough for us to be good.
Yep.
So would kind of just going all in on those young guys, keeping some guardrails up, like having some adults in the room, maybe make it easier for fans to start to buy in with this team?
I could see that. And just being more accepting of the L's right now. Just because, it definitely does feel like this team has one foot in one place and the other foot in another place. And they are trying to do this balancing act that just isn't realistic in the NBA. It's just not.
And that made sense when you had Damian Lillard. None of your higher paid veteran guys, are of that caliber. So I think you're making a great point.
Yeah. I think another thing about Anthony, speaking of having one foot in one place and one foot in another, the thing that is consistently, I think, confusing for that organization about Anthony is nobody knows nobody knows if he should be the starting point guard or the starting shooting guard. Whereas like Scoot and Shaedon have clearly defined roles in that. Whereas Anthony can play a little bit of both. And so it's like, nobody knows where to start him in that mix. And then it becomes, okay, so who's going to the bench out of those three? And it's just, yeah, that is really difficult when you have two guys who are very clearly defined in what their position is. And then Anthony is kind of a tweener and can do either, which is a very valuable, by the way, a very valuable asset for another team. Just not probably valuable for this squad in particular.
He'd be an incredible. Look at any of these teams that are in the 5 through 10 in the West. You know, imagine if Anthony Simons was the fifth starter or the sixth man on one of those teams. I mean, you know, the Lakers, you know, are consistently in search of, you know, additional, you know, help outside of LeBron and Anthony Davis. The Warriors, you know, are going to go through a little bit of a identity crisis this summer, as Klay Thompson, I mean, you know, was I think 0 for 10 in their play-in loss last night, which, you know, I mean, you know, unfortunately for Klay, Lake Oswego legend is, you know, the writing is kind of on the wall for him at this stage in his career. What do the Warriors do? What does Minnesota do after this playoff run? You know, how close are they? Are they you know, an additional, you know, scoring guard away? I think there's going to be a big market for Anthony Simons if the Blazers go down that path, because he's not the first option on a championship team, right? I don't think anybody would argue that. He's probably not the second or third option on a championship team.
No, I don't think so.
But if he's your first guy off the bench, and you know, he is a better version of Eric Gordon in his prime. And so I just think there's going to be a big market for him, and that the Blazers probably need to capitalize on that as they line up their assets, you know, to correspond with this timeline they've created by going so heavily into the draft the last 2 years. Also going into a year when they have 4 more draft picks. They're going to have 2 lottery picks, and then they have 2 second-round picks. So they're going to bring in a lot of young players again next year. You know, even if they end up doing something different with those second rounders, you're going to have 2 lottery picks this year. This is not a draft where you're packaging those together for a player, or, you know, those draft picks are basically as valuable as you make them with the player you select.
Yeah, which is a whole other discussion, by the way, that we will have a lot over the next few months, I have a feeling, with the ambiguity of this draft.
Yeah, it's no WNBA draft. Shout out Cam Brink.
No, it's not. It is definitely, as in the words of Joe Cronin, an exciting opportunity. Because nobody knows what the heck's gonna happen. Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right in the fact that they need to make that exploration, and fans just have to get comfy with that and know that we could be saying goodbye to a few people this off season, and that's what it is. And I mean, you know, I think the other thing that was really difficult about this team in particular is that Dame had such a stranglehold on who they signed last offseason and the moves they made last offseason that it totally put them behind the 8 ball in terms of this year. Because what are you going to do? Not re-sign Jeremy Grant? What does that look like? Especially, you know, like, are you just not going to do it? And then you're like, okay, well, you know, Dame's not back. We're not, I mean, you know, you go to Summer League and there's a press conference for Jeremy Grant, Matisse Thybulle, and that's it. That's all the Blazers got right now, and that's coming to them, you know? So I do think
and the press conference is barely about Jeremy Grant and Matisse Thybulle, by the way, because you're in the middle of the Lillard standoff.
They were absolutely an afterthought. Apologies to them. But you know, like, so that's another thing, is that they didn't really have the opportunity to explore that sort of stuff last summer because they just needed to hold on to what they had.
Right.
They didn't have an opportunity to be like, all right, let's shop this person, let's shop that person, because there was one person who took priority, and that was that. And they needed to see what happened with that in order for all the other dominoes to fall. So now that situation is taken care of. And yeah, this summer is there's going to have to be some looking into the mirror, to say the least, and figuring out how this looks, because the trade deadline also, the trade deadline this year was also bad for having that moment. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, it's just hard. It's hard. This is a tough spot for an organization generally. Like, especially, the Blazers are not a free agent destination.
Right.
So you have to really hope that you draft well and you get the right people in. And it's just not, there's no way they're going to be able to build this team through free agency. So once again,
they didn't want to come when you had a guy, when you had a Hall of Fame centerpiece.
Yep. So, this isn't a situation where there's like, oh, there's multiple routes. It's pretty clear what the route is.
I would agree. And I was talking to somebody. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, my favorite quip, or one of my favorite quips of all the X interviews, was Matisse saying, he was talking to Anthony about all the injuries that they had there. And Anthony was like, it's because we don't have any sun here.
Yeah.
We don't have any sun here, so everybody gets injured. And I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting little anecdote.
Also, imagine if that's the read on Portland around the league.
Yes.
Like, don't go to Portland. There's no vitamin D there. You need to have a UV bed in your house. Maybe that's the kind of air mattress DeAndre Ayton was sleeping on. It was one like in a UV tanning bed air mattress. I had what was a thought I had that I was gonna touch on there, but you make great points, and there is one path, and I think that's where the Blazers are, and the problem that the Blazers face is that the fan base has been through a lot in the last 5 years.
Oh gosh,
because each of the last 3 years they've ended up tanking, and the first 2 years they attempted to tank kind of on the fly. They were like they're quiet tanking, right? It's like players got hurt and it became like, hey, let's get a pick here and then be ready to go next year. And they did that for 2 years. And then they go into this year kind of in the in-between where it's like, if this roster had Damian Lillard, well, you wouldn't have had Malcolm Brogdon and DeAndre Ayton. But, if Jeremy Grant and, you're bringing, Scoot Henderson, it's like you would at least feel like you had something. Right now they're just at the beginning. So while it feels like the third year of a rebuild, like it really is the first year of a rebuild.
Yep.
And that's hard to stomach when you've watched your team not try after February for multiple years. So it's super challenging. And I don't know. I don't know if interest will be higher next year. I don't know if it can be higher next year. But I do think that by being honest about what you're doing and where you are and handing the reins over to Scoot and Shaedon and whoever else you're able to bring in the draft. Hopefully you draft well. It's not a good draft. It could be the worst draft ever, depending on who you listen to. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be talent there. Doesn't mean that you can't find a future all-star. So, plenty of players have become all-stars from the second round, from the middle and late first round. So that's the charge going into this offseason. You have a lot of picks. Can you put them to use? Can you make one of those really pop? Okay, so Blazers, forever doomed. Topic 2. I'm kidding.
Yay!
They're not forever
How
doomed.
rosy and
It's
sunshiny.
a reset. It's a reset. It's a rebuilding. There is no sunshine, Brenna. That might be the name of like a new podcast or a sub podcast. There is no sunshine in Portland. It's never sunny in Portland. Do you think that would get me sued?
I don't think it would. I don't think it would get you sued. But I will say I
just wondered
see
if, like, the
beautiful
always
blue
sunny
sky
people
on the
would
other
be-
side. It does happen
Today
here.
It is spectacular. We're recording this on Wednesday, and I'm in my basement of all places, and I see the sun like streaking through the lights. And I'm like, come to me. Come to me. It's a beautiful day. Beautiful day in Portland, because all days are beautiful in Portland. Take that, Anthony Simons. I hope you enjoy your career in Minnesota.
And hey,
Kidding.
you want to know what? Another thing? That's all the NCAA women's teams think of Portland, too, that we're here. It was beautiful the whole week they were here.
But if you want to know the truth, ask the Oregon State women, because they all left. So
That's why they left.
Okay. So let's transition over to the soccer side. Speaking of teams that have been through it lately, the Thorns in the kind of what I consider their first major move since the sale from Merritt Paulson to the Bethal family. The Thorns are making a coaching change. They did make a coaching change on Tuesday. What did you make of them replacing Mike Norris with one of his assistants and moving Mike Norris to technical director, which feels like a soft firing? Like like you see people like get promoted out of their jobs and then like a year later it's like, oh, mutually agreed to part ways, or it's gotten a job somewhere else. Like, I don't know, is Mike Norris going to be expected to actually come into the office in this new job? I have questions, but go ahead, Brenna. Let me know what you think about this Rooney.
Well, I believe this will be their fourth head coach in as many years. Am I correct on that? I want to make sure I'm right on this, but I'm almost positive it is.
Was Rian a first year coach?
I believe so. So, let's see here. I'm pulling up the Wikipedia just to make sure I'm right.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yep. So we now have four head coaches in as many seasons. Which, honestly, man, it's impressive actually what they've been able to do with that amount of lack of continuity. Okay? Mm-hmm. It actually is pretty impressive that they made this, they made the semis last year under a first-year head coach, and they won it the year before. It's just... I just feel like
this how good the roster is.
Yeah, the organization is just like... I hope it's heading in a new direction, because it just kind of feels a little cursed right now. It's like, all the things that were going on during... Rian's year and everything, like, some of them was stuff that was, didn't happen under her, and she's just trying to manage, and then you finally get through that, and you get hit with, oh yeah, I'm dating one of the players, and you're like, oh my god, like,
yeah,
what is going on? And then it kind of just felt like they just elevated.
Well, you had the trainer giving unprescribed treatments, and so there have been a lot of things, and obviously going back to
Crystal Dunn's husband,
right? Totally.
So it's like, oh my gosh, it's just like it just feels like it's just a revolving situation around there, and I can see why this didn't work out for a lot of reasons. I mean, it kind of always felt like a weird hire to me personally, and this is no shade on Mike whatsoever. I really enjoyed. He was a good person to be around the times that I was around. Yeah. But it did kind of feel like you could probably go get like a number of coaches, and you decide to just go get the guy that's already on staff in an assistant role. Like,
it was at such an interesting moment, right? Because it was only like a month or two after the Yates report. The franchise was just deeply embroiled in scandal, one scandal after another, and I think there's kind of two arguments. I think the fact that you're replacing a woman head coach with a man, I thought was sort of surprising, but also in that exact moment, the one thing that you could say that the Thorns needed was some level of stability. And so by promoting from within, it's a familiar face, it's a familiar voice. And that is really, really valuable in tumultuous times. But it also doesn't
do you many favors down the road sometimes.
Long term. Yeah. And listen, I don't know tactically enough to say, why the Thorns aren't winning. But you're talking about, semis last year, the NWSL championship the year before that, a consistent history of winning and being there at the end of the year. And you pull up the NWSL table right now. Do you know where the Thorns are, Brenna? Last place. Correct. And we're not used to that. And now they are winless in their first four matches with one draw, a goal differential of -4, which is the second worst in the league behind Houston, which has even managed to win a game. And so it's early, right? Like there's a lot of time to turn this around. They have a lot of really great players. Like as we know, Sophia Smith is, an absolute legend in the making. So I would expect the Thorns are going to turn this around and ultimately have a really positive season. But the one thing that you can say is, this is like Thorns 2.0. Friend of the program, Chris Reifer, who hosts the excellent Soccer Made in Portland podcast, Soccer Made in Portland podcast with Ryan Clark. One of his observations I saw on social media was like, it's almost surprising to see, a franchise, struggling and making quick, decisive action to like turn it around. And that, the subtext being that has not been the way the Thorns and Timbers are run under Merritt Paulson and those front offices where, last year, like Gio, was just kind of straggling along for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks when it became pretty clear they needed to make a coaching change. So, there is a way of looking at this through the prism of, is this what, life looks like for the Thorns? Are they, Karina LeBlanc, remains the GM, but you do have new ownership, owners, the Bethals did not buy the Thorns to watch them languish in last place. So, making quick, moves to try to turn this around is probably smart. Now, we'll see over time, like, how many moves are they going to make? Like, I mean, we don't want to have ownership that is overly reactionary, but I think it's probably an encouraging sign, early in their ownership in this, Thorns 2.0 era.
Yeah, I mean, both these soccer teams right now, it's a rough situation, which is not normal. For whatever reason, the Thorns have always kind of been able to overcome it, and that speaks a lot to the players that they have on their roster, and that speaks a lot to us women who have to overcome a lot of trauma to go out there and do things, because I think we're more conditioned to it, just to be completely frank. I would identify with that. That I just probably have more of a resolve than other people, being a female in sports, because I've gotten better at just knowing that I don't have a choice and I've got to get through it. So, I would imagine that a lot of those players feel similarly. But I just also want to say, the Timbers right now also not doing well. They have not won a game since, let's see, March, the beginning of March. Last time they won a home game was at the end of February. So
let's see what they do over these next couple of games going on the road. I think you're still integrating Rodriguez. You have, you have a new system. Phil Neville, I think, on the net has been a positive. The Timbers, I think at one point were leading the league in scoring. They're currently, there's a handful of teams that have scored more than them. They've had some good ties. They've had some good draws. So like,
yeah, I do.
We'll see. Agree. Again, the talent is there. The top level talent is there for them. So I think that, it's really just a question of putting it all together and stringing together some victories.
It's going to be such a shame if they can't put it together, because Evander is becoming the player that we were promised when he came here. So I'm going to be very disappointed if they aren't able to put it together around him, to say the least.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with both those teams is just the fact it is early. It is early. There's plenty of time for things to get better. And what we know historically about certainly the Thorns is that it probably will. And with the Timbers, sort of a new era with Phil Neville, high talent level. So we'll have to wait and see. It is also early, Brenna, in 2024. We're about a third of the way through the year of 2024, which we'll consider to be still early. And that means that we are in the spring. And spring means spring football. And Oregon will have its spring game next Saturday, the 27th. And Oregon State, it is upcoming Saturday, April 20th. Which is very exciting. And the thing here, so let me just say, so spring football, it's it's a little bit wonky. A lot of questions about who's going to be where, blah blah. But there are some themes with Oregon State that I think, are worth exploring. I mean, obviously with Oregon, it's, are they national championship ready? Is Dylan Gabriel going to step right into the shoes of Bo Nix? How good is Jordan James? How do you replace Troy Franklin? Is the offensive line going to be as good as last year? And the answer at Oregon probably is yes. Like, Oregon's going to be really stinking good, even in the Big Ten. Maybe not national championship good in the end, but really stinking good. Oregon State, though, the Beavers lose Damian Martinez to the transfer portal last week. Questions at quarterback, got absolutely hammered by the transfer portal. A first-year head coach who, frankly, hired a lot of his buddies on his coaching staff. I feel like, I don't know, I'm kind of interested in the Oregon State spring game. And, I'm curious to see the quarterbacks. But I'm honestly just kind of curious to see who stands out, because going into next year, you're not thinking really that much about the Beavers, given all the talent they lost. Like, it's not like, oh, they've got, an all-American wide receiver that you can count on coming back. I mean, they lost all those guys. So I'm kind of curious to maybe learn some names on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you would have asked us 2 weeks ago, our answer would be different, because we'd be like, oh, I'm curious about Damian Martinez. Well,
totally.
Goodbye. Which, by the way, did you see his top 5 schools?
I think I saw that he was going to visit Texas and Texas A&M, and that might be all I saw.
He came out with his final. Give me 1 second. He came out with his final 5 yesterday, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little underwhelmed.
I totally missed it. Tell me.
Miami, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arizona.
I would agree that it's underwhelming. Miami has been is one that he's been linked to, kind of since he entered the portal. Obviously, Mario Cristobal there. Arizona, surprising. I'm trying to think of a connection to Brent Brennan and his staff there.
Yeah.
Kentucky, okay. Tennessee's been better. And you said Ole Miss was the other one?
Mississippi State.
Yeah, that's an interesting list. I mean,
they lost their quarterback last year, and
it's interesting. I would, maybe I'm putting too much value on this. Maybe most schools have their lead running backs at this point, but I would think that if Damian Martinez is in the portal, all the blue bloods would be moving around the deck chairs to clear a spot for him. He's just that good.
Yeah. So I don't know if he's a victim of I don't know if he's a victim of going into the transfer portal too late. Like, maybe this spring round isn't as good, or if maybe we just all have put higher value on him than what he actually is. I'd be really surprised by that. But yeah, anyways, just a side note that, okay, I'm glad that I'm not the only one that kind of looked at that top 5 and was like, like, I mean, obviously they're all better than what this Oregon State team is projected to be, and in a better spot.
Yeah. They have a conference.
Yeah.
They have conferences.
They have a conference. That's a start. But like you said, Miami's been meh. Mississippi State, not exactly a team that's on the come up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky, they had a few good years a few years ago. We'll see. Tennessee, yeah, okay. And Arizona is just like, I don't really understand that one either. So
big transition year for Arizona. So
yes.
Yeah, that's
it's a curious list.
Well, and who there has the most NIL opportunities to offer, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that we have to wonder about in this day and age. And obviously that was an issue at Oregon State. I mean, a little bit of back and forth and confusion over that, but clearly Damian Martinez was not happy with his situation at Oregon State. Let's talk about quarterbacks, just because we always talk about quarterbacks, and quarterback matters. Like, it's a very important position. Oregon State has lacked stability at the quarterback position. Obviously replacing Chance Nolan with DJ Uiagalelei last year, and he's now at Florida State. There's really 3 guys in the mix at Oregon State, and one of them we know very well. It's Ben Gulbranson, who who played, extremely well 2 years ago when Oregon State won 10 games and beat Florida in the Las Vegas Bowl, started the Sun Bowl last year. I think he has like 4 degrees from Oregon State by now. Like he's been there so long.
It's absolutely mind-blowing that he's still on this team.
But, this is a spring where he's, competing for the starting job with Giovanni McCoy from the University of Idaho and Jabari Johnson, who transferred from Missouri. Jabari Johnson is from Seattle, Pacific Northwest guy.
Yeah.
Lots of talent. Giovanni McCoy was, he was a Jerry Rice Award finalist, I believe, as a freshman at the University of Idaho, which for those who don't know is the FCS Freshman of the Year. He was outstanding in the Big Sky Conference.
Yep.
Brenna, I watched more Idaho football last year than I'm going to guess most Oregon State.
He was the 2022 Jerry Rice Award winner, which is the FCS National Freshman of the Year. That's what I thought.
Okay. Okay.
I wanted to make sure I was right on that. Yep.
So I guess of the three, I'm most familiar with Gulbranson and McCoy.
Yes.
And my quick 2 cents on McCoy is awesome FCS quarterback, very exciting, very creative, really athletic, holds onto the ball a lot. Is good working his way out of trouble, but also creates a lot of turnovers, fumble prone, turnover prone. I think he gets himself into a lot of trouble too. So, normally at Oregon State, I'd be like, I'm not entirely sure he's a quarterback at this level. Then again, I don't know what level Oregon State is at right now. Maybe he is a quarterback for their level. So I'm curious to see kind of what the quarterbacks look like. Jabari Johnson, I think, kind of has the edge of the at least of the transfers. But what do you think of this group of quarterbacks? Or do you think that Ben Gulbranson, 97 years old, should be the presumed starter given all that he's committed to the program?
I do not think he should be the presumed starter. Ben Gulbranson has proven to be sorry, Ben. He's more of a game manager than he is a quarterback. That's what he's been able to kind of do at OSU during his time there. Is he has been able to help lead them to wins, but I think that it hasn't really been. It's been due to his lack of mistakes than it is a situation where it was due to his playmaking ability. And having somebody who's mistake-free is great, but you also need a little bit of spice in there. I would be pretty stunned if on Saturday Ben is not taking the first snaps. He took the first snaps last year. DJ came in and took second snaps, and then Aiden came in and took the third snaps. So I think that we're going to see Ben starting, which is totally fine, and I don't think anybody should. If somebody is like, oh my gosh, not again, like I wouldn't take I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. Who knows though? Maybe we won't, since it is a different staff this year, different offensive coordinator. But if I were to be betting, I would put Ben as the person who gets the first snaps there. But I'm not sure if that really means anything. Jabari's interesting just because, he didn't play at all his freshman year. So, he's kind of an unknown in terms of how he plays at the college level. And then you've got McCoy, who, like you said, is a thrilling, exciting quarterback. But, what goes up must come down. And sometimes there are moments where it comes down. And yes, I did watch a little bit more Idaho football last year as well, since we both have our own connections.
Roots.
Yeah, we both have our connections to that region, to say the least. So, I was happy for them to be doing well, because there's been a lot of issues down there over the however many years I was around Idaho. So I'm glad that they are finally playing well. But
Idaho's coach, I would say, by the way, Jason Eck, is so great. Love Jason Eck.
Great Twitter follow. Shout out to Jason Eck. Great Twitter follow. Fun guy. Fun fun guy.
You'll see him.
Their
You'll see him
athletic
coaching
director
at a
did
higher
make
level.
a very, very good hire in him. So good for Terry. There have been some other hires down there that have not been as great under her regime. So regime's the wrong word, but her era.
Her reign.
But she got the football coach right, which you and I both know is the most important one.
Yep.
Especially in a place like that. Yeah, there are so many question marks on this team that it's hard to really get a feel for anything around them. And so that means you kind of come into Saturday with zero expectations. I'll be there. I'll be chilling, hanging out. And we'll see what happens. I mean, last year was interesting because there was some buzz around Aiden going into last year's spring game, and he kind of delivered on that. And it was like, oh, okay, like this
he was very good in spring game.
Legit be something. But this year it's pretty. I mean, I have watched all the spring football interviews, and the narrative has been that the defense is dominating the offense.
But and listen, this is a Trent Bray led team. Talk about getting hires right. We're gonna find out if Oregon State got that hire right with Trent Bray. Lifelong Beaver essentially since college, but you would expect it to be a defensive led team. But
yes,
that offense is completely turned over. You have limited returning receiver talent. You are trying out new quarterbacks. Your presumptive starting running back was your third string running back 2 years ago, and he was really good as a change of pace third running back. Is he ready to be is he good enough to be the number one? I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's two reasons the defense could be dominating the offense. One, the defense is that good, or that the offense just isn't any good. And, I don't know that we will get the answer to that necessarily on Saturday. It's hard to learn a whole lot about a team when it's playing itself, but I do think that answer will come to us fairly early in the season in 2024.
I just looked at their wide receiver
Jimmy Valson's good. He had a touchdown in the Sun Bowl.
That is literally the only player that I'm like, oh yeah, I recognize that name. I recognize Darius Clemens just because of the fact that, obviously he went to high school here and then went to Michigan and then transferred to OSU. But other than that, man.
Yeah, there's guys, Jeremiah Noga, Zachary Card, those are guys who, ran some routes last year, like you saw them, but they obviously weren't preferred receivers. And then, Jermaine Terry, the tight end, was an option last year as well. So, I was going to say, I
was going to go look at the tight end room, and Jermaine Terry's the other one that I recognize. But yeah,
I'm interested. I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see how
me too.
Trent Bray runs things. Trent Bray is an interesting guy to be the head coach. He's not a particularly what's the right word? I just don't think he's not a marketer, right? Like, he is there to coach football, and that's his skill. And so, you haven't seen him a lot. You haven't heard from him a lot. He's not the football coach who shows up at a basketball game and rips his shirt off and then does the wave with the student section or, whatever. There's just not, I'm going to be curious to see how Trent Bray, personality wise, grows into this role, because as the head football coach, you become the face of the university. And, Jonathan Smith was very good at that. Mike Riley was obviously excellent at that. Jonathan Smith? Oh, I think so. I think Jonathan Smith was first of all, I think Jonathan Smith he understood that part of his job. He wasn't the most he's not Dan Lanning. Okay. Dan Lanning, I think, is excellent at that.
Yes.
But I think Jonathan Smith did a great job of interacting with the community. You saw him at other sporting events. You saw him, I thought he was good in a room. Trent Bray's going to have to learn that stuff. And maybe he has, it's just going to be interesting to see him grow into that role, because the one thing that, I was thinking about it the other day, when Jonathan Smith first left, I wrote something about, prospective candidates. I left Trent Bray off the list, even though I thought he would probably be the most obvious choice, because the thing that was always said about him and that he had said was that he really had no interest in becoming a head coach. So I sort of took him at his word on that. And then, obviously it's a different circumstance. But there are parts about him that are not a natural fit for this position, personality-wise. And so I'm just going to be interested to see how he grows into it. Because from a football standpoint, a football credentials standpoint, absolutely deserves the opportunity and is absolutely ready. It's unfortunate he wasn't able to hold on to a little more talent in the transfer portal, but he's in good company at Oregon State on that.
I think that they would all agree that they're in bad company. The only thing that, when it comes to Jonathan Smith, at least, and I'm just going to come at this from my media perspective, which is, the one I'm going to know the most, is that Jonathan Smith, I didn't feel like he was great at, I don't know. He just wasn't the most charismatic head coach I've ever been around.
Sure.
And his press conferences were like watching paint dry on a wall.
Mm-hmm.
They were awful.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Like, it was like, man, can you say anything interesting? And, that's not going to be everyone's experience, but part of being a head coach is giving press conferences that are at least interesting and are able to help you kind of spread your reach and people know who you are. And that was not one of Jonathan Smith's fortes, I would say. I mean, I would get done watching his press conferences and be like, well, I'm glad I just watched 15 minutes of air.
I would say Jonathan Smith was helpful. He was somebody in different, like, press conferences, I agree, were a little, could be a little stale. I sometimes felt like he was a little nervous. But I also think that, like, in the fundraising realm, from what I've heard, he was really, helpful and willing. He was visible around town and around campus. He was helpful to us. If you wanted to have a conversation, not in a press conference, he would be, agreeable to those sorts of things. So, there's just parts of doing the job that are not, calling plays and recruiting. And Trent Bray's never had to worry about a lot of that stuff. So it's just I'm interested to see where it goes. I don't know how many times I can say I'm interested. I think I've said it probably about 35 times so far, but I am interested. Brenna, we got to get out of here. You've got to go to do some hard work for Coin 6. I have to whip up some columnizing here. So we're going to get out of here. Next week, I think we'll probably be talking some Oregon spring football because the Ducks will be getting ready for their spring showcase the following weekend. I think we're probably going to cool it on the Blazers for a little while, but always stuff to talk about here in the mighty Northwest. So for Brenna Green, I am Bill Warren from Oregon Live and the Oregonian. This is the Oregonian Sports Podcast. We look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks for listening.